Madam President, before I begin my prepared remarks, I'd like to just acknowledge my constituents in South Dakota who are dealing with unprecedented flooding. We've seen historic amounts of rainfall already in the month of June that dwarf anything that we can compare to throughout our state's history. Hail, winds causing widespread damage across the state. And not just our state, not confined to our state, there are states in the region as well that are experiencing some of these same circumstances and tremendous damage to property. And so I just wanted to express my thoughts and prayers to the people that I represent, as well as to those in other states who are dealing with some of these circumstances, Madam President, and to say thank you and express my appreciation to our first responders who have been very much in demand and on call the last few days. Madam President, the American people are very tired, they're very weary, they're arguably fed up. The Washington Post headline from last Friday summed it up. Obama's image hits record lows in trio of polls. Gallup, CNN, ORC, and Bloomberg polls released last week all found that the president's favorable rating had fallen to new lows. And Madam President, it's no wonder. 5 years ago, 5 years I should say, after the recession supposedly ended, most Americans still feel like they're in the midst of it. And it's not just me saying that. The President's own Federal Reserve Chair, Janet Yellen, stated as recently as March, and I quote, "The recovery still feels like a recession to many Americans. And it also looks that way in some economic statistics," end quote. Madam President, let's talk about some of those statistics. Unemployment has spent the past 5.5 years at recession-level highs. Currently, nearly 10 million Americans are unemployed, more than a third of them for 6 months or longer. The labor force participation rate is at a 36-year low. A USA Today editorial from last week noted, and I quote, "The decline in the labor force participation rate is one of the most troubling trends of our time," end quote. Of course, the labor participation rate, Madam President, being the fraction of the available workforce that's actually working, or at least looking for work. So what's driving that trend? Americans so discouraged by their failure to find a job that they have literally given up looking altogether. That's what's driving the trend in the labor participation rate. Now, even after accounting for baby boomers retiring and more people going to college, and this is again from the USA Today piece that I mentioned earlier, this translates to 6 million people who could be working or looking for work. And as the paper points out, the lack of these workers in the workforce means a weaker economy, lower tax revenue, as well as greater governmental expense. Young people just getting out of college face a bleak job market. The unemployment rate for young adults is a staggering 13.2%, or more than twice the national average. The Director of Outreach for Generation Opportunity, a nonprofit advocacy organization for millennials, recently stated that more than 4 out of 5 recent graduates don't have jobs. Currently, 36% of young adults are living at home with their parents. It's no wonder that CNN Money reports that young adults aged 18 to 34 are most likely to feel that the American dream is unattainable, with 63% saying it's not only unattainable, it's impossible. Madam President, everywhere Americans look, prices are rising. The price of everything from milk to the refrigerator to hold it has increased over the past several years. Gas prices have almost doubled since President Obama took office. College costs are soaring. And then there's Obamacare, which has meant soaring premiums and huge deductibles for way too many American families. Madam President, being in the middle class was once associated with financial security. With a little prudence, middle-class families could be expected to see their kids through college and to retire comfortably. No more. In the Obama economy, the future is less secure. Household incomes not only failed to rise over the past 5.5 years, it's actually dropped by $3,500 under the President's watch. Wages have remained flat, and economic growth has been tepid at best. Middle-class families are no longer looking forward to a future of economic security. Instead, they are praying that they don't get hit with any unexpected bills. They're worrying that they won't be able to send their kids to college. And they're wondering just how long they'll have to work past retirement to have the economic security that they need. In a previous America, low-income families could confidently expect that effort and hard work could bring them into the ranks of the middle class. How many of our parents started out living on a shoestring, but ended up sending their kids to college and retiring comfortably? Today, though, opportunities to reach the middle class are few and far between. 14 million more Americans are on food stamps today than when the president took office. Democrat policies like the Obamacare 30-hour work week are hitting low-income Americans the hardest. And many of the better-paying jobs lost during the recession are not being replaced. 78% of the jobs lost during the recession were high or mid-wage jobs, but just 56% of the jobs recovered have been high or mid-wage jobs. That means that almost half of the new jobs that have been created are low-wage jobs. That's not the kind of climate that enables upward mobility. And the worst part, Madam President, is that it doesn't look like things are going to get better anytime soon. This week, the International Monetary Fund announced that it now predicts the United States economic growth rate will not exceed 2% this year. That's not anywhere close to the kind of growth that we need for a real recovery. The New York Times reported last week, and I quote, "The Federal Reserve's persistently optimistic in its previous forecast said in March that it no longer expected a full recovery in the foreseeable future," end quote. Let me repeat that, Madam President. The Federal Reserve said that it no longer expected a full recovery in the foreseeable future. 4 years ago, President Obama and his administration proclaimed the advent of the summer of economic recovery. President Obama claimed that the country is headed in the right direction, and Vice President Biden confidently predicted in April of 2010 that sometime in the next couple of months, we're going to be creating between 250,000 jobs a month and 500,000 jobs a month. In August of that year, Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner published an op-ed in the New York Times entitled, "Welcome to the Recovery." Well, Madam President, as the American people know, recovery summer never materialized. 4 years later, the American people are still waiting. And according to the Federal Reserve, they're going to have to wait longer. In 2009, the President's economic advisors predicted that unemployment would fall below 6% in 2012. 2 years later, unemployment is still firmly stuck above 6%. And the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco has suggested that 6% unemployment should be considered the new normal. Well, Mr. President, Madam President, I don't accept that. And Republicans don't accept that. We don't accept 6.3% unemployment, sluggish economic growth, and struggling middle-class families as the new normal, because it doesn't have to be that way. We can get our economy going again, but it's going to take something a lot different than the policies of the last 5.5 years. It's going to take the kind of policies that remove families' burdens instead of increasing them. It's going to take policies that encourage businesses to create jobs, not to cut jobs. And Republicans have a lot of ideas about how to get started. Ideas like repealing the Obamacare medical device tax that has already killed tons of thousands of jobs and will kill thousands more if it's not stopped. Or restoring the 40-hour work week so businesses will no longer be forced to cut employees' hours under Obamacare mandates. Or stopping the President's national energy tax, which would make it more difficult for American families, particularly low-income families, to afford gas, heating, and electricity. Or enacting trade promotion authority to open new markets to American farmers, workers, and businesses, and to create new, good-paying jobs for American workers. Madam President, the list goes on. These are just a few of the ideas that Republicans have to get our economy going again. And if Democrats were serious about wanting to help American families, they'd be working with Republicans to help us get legislation passed. Madam President, we don't have to accept the President's economy as the new normal. Chronic high unemployment, sluggish growth, massive amounts of debt. That shouldn't be the norm, and we shouldn't be satisfied with it. Republicans are going to be working every day to ensure that it isn't the new norm. And we will continue working until our economy is flourishing again and every American has the opportunity for a good job and a prosperous and a secure future. And we hope, Madam President, that Democrats will work with us toward that end. And it means opening up this floor in the United States Senate to legislation that will grow our economy and create jobs, allow us to openly debate, allow us to offer amendments, something that hasn't happened here for the past year. Since July of last year, there have only been 9 Republican amendments voted on the floor of the United States Senate. 9 amendments in almost a year. Now, the ironic thing about that is the same procedures that are being used to block Republican amendments are also blocking Democrat amendments. And so in that same time frame, Democrats have only had 7 amendments voted on in the last year. In the world's greatest deliberative body, the place where we're supposed to have open debate, open amendment process, Republicans have had 9 amendments voted on. Now, we could take that as a personal affront, but that's not what it's about, Madam President. It's about the people that we represent, because they elect us here to come out and to represent them and to make sure that their voices are heard in the political process and the debates that we have here in Washington on the big issues that are important to them and their families. And so when amendments are blocked and this process is shut down here on the floor of the United States Senate, it's the people's voices who don't get heard and don't get represented. That's got to change. And it needs to change soon, because the issues are big. The problems and the challenges that face middle-income families in this country are consequential. And many of us in this chamber come here every single day hoping to offer legislation and amendments that we believe will be solutions to getting the economy growing again and to create jobs. And every single day, for the last year at least, we've been shut down. We can do better by the American people. They deserve better. Madam President, I hope we will do better, and we can start now.